Before I get too far into the review of the deck, I want to talk a little bit about the creator, because it's one of the reasons why I love it. Not only do I love the artwork, and I'll get into why, but I really adore the creator. So I have been a fan of the creator for a few years now, and it actually started while Ian and I were still dating another person. I'm not going to name them. I don't think they'd appreciate being named on our channel, but it's Ian and I's ex-girlfriend. Ian and I's ex-girlfriend was a huge fan of the shitty horoscopes by Amrit Brar, to the point where when I mentioned that I don't do horoscopes or astrology as part of my practice, she was essentially like, well, I think you would like the work of this one person. I know that you don't include that, but I think you would really, really like these, and showed them to me on a site where you could purchase the artwork as bags and coffee cups. And sorry, we live in the South and it's spring, so there's all kinds of flying insects. Anyway, I adored the Capricorn artwork from the shitty horoscopes of Amrit Brar, to the point where I started looking into the creator. And upon looking into the creator, found that Amrit Brar is a Sikh and Punjab South Indian person of color who is queer. And not only does their artwork have this element of darkness and humor at the same time, sort of morbid or dark humor, but it also has elements of botany and anatomy and the supernatural, and then also is influenced by them being a person from this community that has survived genocide, and then she's also queer. And I was just like, wow, I love this creator. I started following the creator on Tumblr, and purchasing various, like I had a tote bag at one point. I bought our ex-girlfriend one of the coffee mugs with the artwork on it, bought that person a tote bag, and it got to the point where I was literally considering getting one of the art pieces tattooed, maybe minus the word Capricorn, because I loved the artwork and I loved what it said, and it felt so personal and so accurate to me, but it said Capricorn, and I felt that that misrepresented my personal occult practices. And then I went back and forth on which quote I wanted tattooed, because one is like, if you're going to light your own path, be prepared to light your own pyre. And it was crossed bones lit on fire like matches. And the other was, essentially, no one loves the butcher but the knife. And I adored them and debated getting them tattooed for many years, to the point where I actually looked up whether or not Amrit Brar was okay with people being tattooed with their artwork. And the answer was yes, but they like if you will send them a donation, like a thank you donation. You don't have to, but they'd appreciate it. Anyway, I decided not to get the work tattooed because I didn't want to get the word Capricorn on my body.
Just in the patron section of Discord?
Yes.
Okay. It is in both.
So then when I found out that this creator, who managed to create the only horoscopes I ever identified with, was creating a tarot deck that was intentionally inspired by growing up in this Punjab and Sikh family, and on the relationship to queerness that comes from coming from a community like that, well, I was like, okay, I'm really interested. And then I saw them, and they're gorgeous. They're so beautiful and very much my aesthetic. They're black and gold. So I did some research into some interviews that were conducted regarding the zines and the tarot because I wanted to talk with the creator's own words about the kind of things that inspire their work. And I came across a few different quotes that I'm going to share with you. So to start with, in an interview for Kajal Mag, she talks about how her family had to flee the Punjab region because the government started committing genocide against the Sikh community, and how that influenced her growing up because of the fears of her family regarding ethnic prejudice, religious prejudice, cultural, religious, and ethnic genocide against them. She goes on to talk about how death is such a huge influence on her artwork and on the tarot deck, and how due to the repercussions of the attempted genocide against her family and due to deaths that she encountered in her childhood, Amrit Brar started reading Sikh scripture and started associating queerness and death with each other. And quotes Guru Granth Sahib by the Sufi poet Farid Shakarganj, that we are all considered brides to God. Regardless of gender, the bride leaves one house for another upon death, where God is considered the bride's lover. The theme is that your life's mission is to transcend this earthly boundary and become one with a genderless and formless entity. And I'm a huge fan of that piece of work, and also of the sentiment that upon death we become one with this nothingness that also loves us. And regardless of whether we are killed for being of this ethnic minority or of this particular religion or this particular culture, or because we're queer, we will return to this being that loves us, but that also allows us to dissolve and be unmade. She talks about how her work is also influenced by South Asian horror and ghost stories, which same, and also about the idea that there must be a great many queer ancestors looking on us from the ancestral plane as queer people who are living much more openly than they were able to live, and how now, having moved to the ancestral plane, they can be very openly queer. And so the afterlife must be very queer. Because in life we have to put on this portrayal of being not queer, and in death,
what are you going to do, kill me?
Right, throw a queer party. Not her words, my words, but I really like that. Let's see. So she talks about creation being inspired by a gross hunger inside of her, that she struggled with depression and compulsion, and as a coping mechanism, turned to art to fill a hunger and emptiness inside of her. I didn't turn to art for that. I turned to learning everything I possibly could all the time, but I get it. And let's see. I think that's about what I wanted to read from the interviews that she had, and now I will move into actually talking about the deck. Cool. So this is the more expensive version of the deck. This is the $88 version. There is one that is less expensive, but the $88 has really nice gold leafing on the edge, like gold edging. As someone who reads often, often. And who has read professionally, I prefer decks with the gold edging, and I'm willing to pay the extra money because it stops the cardstock from splitting apart as quickly and protects the edges from getting bent. And if the edges of your deck are bent, you will start recognizing cards before you pull them,
Right,
and that may kind of influence your reading without you
This
being
is
aware
no
of it.
method of cheating at poker. What if you mar the edges of the cards, you're no longer dealing fairly and you're no longer shuffling fairly. It does influence how the cards fall.
Exactly. And you may not even be aware that you have started recognizing which cards feel a certain way, but I think that it can subconsciously influence your readings. Something I don't like about the deck, because I do want to give an honest review and not just fangirl over how much I like the creator. I don't like the box, and I don't like how the cards fit in the box. It's very hard to get the deck put away.
It is a super tight fit.
It is a super tight fit, and you can see me struggling. They are right up to the very, very, very top of the deck, of the box. And so you have to kind of struggle to get them put away. And because the cards are very slick and a nice high quality slick cardstock, it's kind of a pain in the ass. So that's the thing I don't like. Now I'm gonna say something that I like about the deck, and please note that I've had people correct me on this already. I like, from my perspective, the fact that this is essentially a non-gendered deck. And that means a lot to me. However, I've had people say, skeletons can be sexed. Now, they said that skeletons have a gender. That's not accurate. Skeletons can be sexed using either DNA or slightly less accurate judging of pelvic shape and other factors. So you can probably determine from a skeleton whether someone created large gametes or small gametes. You won't be able to determine if they were intersex. You won't be able to determine their genetic composition, but you could probably figure out whether or not they had a uterus and had born children. This deck is not that detailed.
This deck is not fully anatomically precise skeletons.
And regardless of what the skeleton, was capable of doing when it was not a skeleton, whether it could bear children or not, that doesn't determine the person who died's gender. Additionally, I had someone say, well, some of the figures are wearing various headdresses from Sikh culture that determine gender. Amrit Brar in interviews has talked about the fact that in Sikhism, the ideal is to eventually become a being that is above or beyond or without gender, that has transcended our ideas of gender and become a universal being. She has talked about how in Sikh doctrine, there is no homophobia or transphobia or strict definition of what gender or sexuality is, and that God does not have a gender. The Sikh idea of the divine being does not have a gender. When you become a baptized Sikh, you are supposed to be an individual who exalts oneself past all of the variables that tie a person to earth. The intention is to become a person at oneness with God and with the universe, not a person who has a gender. So regardless of whether or not the Sikhs are wearing certain headscarves in this, that doesn't actually determine their gender. Additionally, from the Interfaith Council, the Sikh gentleman that I worked with said that originally all people of all genders were instructed to wear the turban that they wear. Is turban the actual word for that? Can you look that up? The headdress. I don't think turban is the right word for a Sikh headdress. Ian's gonna Google it. Of course, we're Googling in America, so we'll get back to that. The deck comes with a PDF, the Marigold Tarot, a guide to the symbolism. The PDF is amazing and also available for purchase as a PDF online separate from buying the deck. You can also buy it, I think, as a print book now.
I believe so.
So the book is a guide to the symbolism of the deck. It is not a manual on using the deck. And it goes on to explain that while the artwork was constructed with some inspiration from the Rider-Waite Smith system so that people could recognize the cards and read from them, it was hugely inspired by Punjab and Sikh Punjab culture. Each of the cards talks about, in this deck, why certain images are on there, and I'll give you guys a couple of examples.
So, the actual term in Punjabi, which I am going to mispronounce, is dastyar.
Dastyar.
Yes, roughly, which apparently literally translates to hand of God.
Oh, that's beautiful. Okay, so not a turban. We're going to mispronounce this, dastyar, and it means the hand of God. They are marked with the hand of God. I love that. So it explains that marigolds are commonly seen throughout celebrations and auspicious occasions in an individual's life. They are worn as garlands, scattered freely, grown in abundance, and are featured prominently at festivals and weddings. With the advent of photography, it is not uncommon to see marigold garlands hung around photographs of the deceased or placed upon bodies prior to cremation. It is the flower that finds itself entwined in the journey of life and death. I really like that that's what inspired the use of marigolds in the Marigold Tarot. So, the borders of each card, it says, are inspired by Gota embroidery, the embellishment found on many types of South Asian clothing and widely applied to hems and sleeves. Gotapati quite literally means a strip of gota or a length of gota. Traditionally, these embellishments were embroidered with threads of various metals, gold among them. Gold is the only color used in the deck alongside the black and white artwork. This references the dichotomies present in this metal, holiness versus wealth. Teeth and bone. Much of the clothing, cultural, and religious references in this deck are particular to the cultures of the Sikhs of Punjab. As per Sikh scripture, there is no promise of an afterlife in a heaven or hell. Sikhs traditionally cremate their dead, perceiving the body as empty upon expiry. The union between the body and soul has broken, and the physical form is now merely a shell in which a person once resided. The many skeletal figures throughout this deck do not directly imply darkness or an afterlife. They are, after all, the very same bones that reside along flesh, sinew, and viscera. It is an acknowledgement of the fact that enlightenment is within the reach of living flesh. Divinity exists inside of us and others in perpetuity, should we acknowledge it. There is no need to fear teeth and bone when it is stripped of the pulp that makes up a human body. It has only ever been human and nothing more. These same skeletons wander and wonder and love and grieve. While the deck does draw influence from the particular cultural practices surrounding the Sikh faith, Sikh as a religion does not hold with premonitions or fortune-telling. The use of poetry, allegory, and storytelling may be widespread, but it is a faith that demands a presence of consciousness that focuses on the now. This deck is a tool that can be used both in the fashion of traditional tarot and as a means of meditating on questions concerning the present. See, I adore that because one of the things that I really struggle to convey in our tarot classes is that I think that atheists and agnostics and people who belong to cultures or faith traditions that do not recognize divination can still make use of tarot as a means of exploring themselves or their circumstances. And this deck is explicitly created from a culture, from a person from a culture that would use it exactly like that. So we'll start with the Hanged Man. You can see.
I like that the wands are roses.
Oh, how well you all can see that. And then that's the back with the marigold. Key symbols, the Bahira trees and gold cord. The Hanged Man swings from the branches of 2 Bahira trees on a gold rope. The tree shows no fruit, too early in the season to determine how much it might bear. In this same way, the Hanged Man is suspended in time, positive and negative outcomes stretched out before him. The Hanged Man is a complex card that can take on a myriad of meanings. He can symbolize martyrdom, hardship, confusion, facing consequences, and forcing oneself to consider different perspectives. The world may turn upside down in the event of new problems and conflicts arising, but the Hanged Man asks us to consider our position and see what we can learn from it. Reversed, this card can imply indecision, unforeseen difficulties, and unwillingness to change. So, although the accompanying book, is not designed to teach you how to read tarot, you could definitely use each of the explanations for various cards as a means of expanding your understanding of those cards.
There's actually a whole lot going on here, but that one in particular I find interesting because the tools are different.
Yes. So here's the Death card. Key symbols, the short sickle, wheat halo, and barren land. Death is depicted as a farmer. His head is haloed with a pattern resembling wheat, his hand holding a short sickle traditionally used for harvesting crops. Death operates as the farmer does, allowing the seeds of life to have their time to grow and flourish before making room for new life to take its course. The land on which he stands is currently barren, but growth occurs behind him, implying that new life will soon take root. Death is associated with transformation. It is a card that asks for us to accept changes and evolution, especially in the event that it is painful or hard-won. The passage of time brings new obstacles and opportunities as old ones fall by the wayside. Reversed, this card can imply stagnation and resisting change. That is fantastic, because it goes into saying that this is about one opportunity ending, one thing fading and going away, so another new thing can take its place. I really appreciate decks that are clear that the death card doesn't always mean death, and it isn't always this horrific, tragic thing. It's just part of a cycle. And it's a cycle that, upon being embraced, allows for new opportunities. So I super appreciate that, as well as just finding the imagery fantastic. Okay, let's do the Tower. Key symbols, stormy skies, lightning, and carnations. Lightning strikes a lone tower. You see that? And stormy skies hang overhead, implying that the scene will soon be overtaken. Below the chaos, carnations signify an attempt to remain poised in the face of strife. The tower is associated with calamity, struggle, conflict, misjudgment, challenge, and momentous change. A situation is arising or has arisen that is a cause for concern, and the outcomes could be disastrous. The tower requests that we take a step back to inspect ourselves and our conflicts, take the initiative to act and to evolve. Reversed, it could imply an unwillingness to see problems for what they are, looming disaster, or avoiding change. Once again, I just want to say that I really appreciate the fact that it's not like, oh, this means disaster, 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 nothing can be done. It's more along the lines of, now there's change and we have to figure out how we're going to deal with it. So I'm going to do one more of the major arcana, and then I want to show how unusual the minor arcana are and how much I like how they're done. Unfortunately, I'm having trouble finding the swords of the minor arcana, even though I feel like I've gone through like half the deck.
Gone through most of
There we go.
it. Yeah.
So, talk about the magician.
Let me see.
Can you see that?
Yes.
Excellent. So I really like the magician on this deck. I find it very different than the average magician in a deck. To start with, the tools that the magician are holding are very, very different. Normally there's the table before the magician with all the various tools on it, and instead this death figure is in active movement. See, key symbols, the star, clementine, and ton branches. The star and the clementine in the hands of the magician pay homage to things both earthly and celestial. All the tools required to navigate through this life can be found down below or up above. So rather than having a table of the tools traditionally associated with a magician, this artist went with the concept that every tool you need to understand the self and the cosmos is found within and without, either around you in the spheres of heaven, or within in the spheres within, or around you in the spheres of the earth. And I really, really like that, because rather than saying you need a wand or a chalice, it's saying anyone can do this with any tools. The ton, otherwise known as tuna branches, meanwhile, are a reference to the many uses of the tree as both timber and medicine. The magician is a card traditionally associated with manifestation, whether that means putting one's dreams into actions, realizing goals, or seizing the moment. It is a card that can also imply insecurity or manipulation when reversed, and it asks us to take full advantage of our resources, both physical and metaphysical. So I want to just give sort of an example of the unusualness of the minor arcana. To start with, the cups are skulls.
It's awesome.
The chalices or the cups are skulls, which I really like as a conceit. The swords are various traditional weapons of India. And each of the traditional weapons has particular significant meaning to the cultures of India. So I found that really, really fascinating.
Yeah.
Rather than coins, there are rings.
Which we talked about a little bit already.
Which we talked about a little bit. And rather than wands, there are various flowers. And each of the various flowers, like the swords, were picked for particular cultural significance. So overall, I love this deck. My concerns with it, as a person who's provided professional readings, would be, would this deck work for reading for someone who has no experience with the tarot, or has just enough experience to have certain expectations as to what the cards will look like?
I'd be more worried about the second one.
And when you're reading for someone, it sometimes helps to be able to point at certain images on the deck and sort of explain, this person is about to take this step, or this person is surrounded by these certain aspects, and that means this. You would very definitely, if you were to use this deck for reading for people who are just familiar enough with tarot to need certain images in order to recognize what the card is trying to say, to take additional steps in explaining why the picture looks the way it does. Now, I think that that's very possible, especially with the PDF or the book that you could study from and learn the cultural significance. I do think that darker decks work for certain kind of readings better, because people do have this expectation of the dark room and the velvets and the silks and the flickering candlelight. This deck really goes with that aesthetic. But if you were using this deck as a professional reader in a more new age styled place, you know, it's not going to match the aesthetic as well. I definitely lean more towards the former than the latter, though, in terms of my aesthetic when I do professional readings.
I'm also going to make a note that this is presupposing that you were doing readings in America.
Yes.
If you're doing readings in India,
then these aren't things that are associated the same way
at all. And
yeah.
in fact, the symbolism on the cards may be really easy for a random person to understand.
Yes. So if you were to belong to a culture that was not the traditional Western occultism influenced culture, then the symbolism would be a lot easier to both interpret and explain to someone in a reading. I find that this symbolism works better for me than any deck I've ever looked at. That I really respond to the symbolism in a very personal fashion. So what I'm debating doing is getting the deck for myself for personal readings. I'm not using it for my professional ones. I've been going back and forth on that though. Before I pack up the review for the day, I do want to say I took about twice as long as I meant to. In the future, I'll try and keep the tarot reviews a little shorter. I'm just a huge fangirl of this artist and the work of this artist.